Thank you so much, Gabriela. I mean, it's been a while. I started asking for this interview almost last year. We couldn't
Yes.
find the right time for us to sit and talk, but finally we managed it, and I'm really happy that you make a time for this interview for AFSA.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad you also picked on me to make a presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So without further ado, let's start. I really wanted to know about you in person. I'm really curious to know more about you, about the organizations, because most of AFSA members I have a personal relationship so far. I know a little bit about, them, what they have been doing in their country. But for you, I'm also a student. So can we start from the very beginning? Tell us who Gabriel is, your childhood, your education. Give us a picture of your background.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for this opportunity to speak about myself.
Yeah.
Gabriel Manyangaze was born about 56 years ago in a rural setting in a place called Nyajena Mashingo in Zimbabwe. I was born into a very big family, and I am a third born in a family of 10. So
yeah, it's a large family.
Yes, and I went to school in the rural village and at a school called Mashapa School, a primary school. During our time, there was no preschool. We just went straight on to primary school.
Yeah.
And I did my first 2 years of high school at a school called the John Talak Secondary School, which is in Bulawayo, which is a boarding school. And I did my Cambridge ordinary level in 1986, and proceeded to do my higher education in secondary school, which is advanced level, at Chibi High School, where I qualified to go to university. And during that time, there was only one university in Zimbabwe, which is the University of Zimbabwe. So I qualified to go to the University of Zimbabwe, and I studied politics and administration for 3 years, graduating with an honors in
Is that a political science kind of?
Yes, it was a combination. Yes, it was a combination of political science and public administration. That was because they've separated into political science and administration, but then they were dual, so that's why it was to study it at honors level. And from then I joined the teaching profession, and I taught at a school called Tennis and Tlabangana High School, and I taught for 9 years teaching geography and mathematics. After which I then joined the Zimbabwe Council of Churches as the Human Rights and Advocacy Officer from 2001. And I worked there for 16 years, of which the other 14 years I had been promoted to become the programs director for the Zimbabwe Council of Churches, and focusing on issues, among other things. I had the women's unit, we had the youth unit, we had the justice, peace and advocacy unit, and we had the mission and evangelism unit. So it was a very big department with 15 members of staff.
Yeah.
And among some of the programs that I did in economic justice related to food production in what I would say maybe agroecology, but we're calling then farming God's way. And we also had an advocacy program that focused mainly on issues of good governance, and the way it related to issues of economic justice and also then I got involved in climate change a lot, and relating climate change to food production as well as the maintenance of a good environment and the balance in the biodiversity. So
it's really very interesting that the church has this kind of diverse programs, addressing all these, development, socio-economic issues, and very interesting also to hear that they have a program on environment and food security, addressing this kind of issues. So was it a consortium or?
No, it was a full-time employment, because whilst I was the programs director, I also would hold some of the spaces and bring in program officers who were specifically responsible for that. But I was the one who would do the fund sourcing and also do the report writing and accountability to our donors, in conjunction with the General Secretary, who was overseeing all other work within the Zimbabwe Council of Churches.
So I mean, the churches incorporate different beliefs, phases, or is it only a Protestant or a Christian churches coalition?
This is a coalition of Protestant churches.
Okay.
And at that time there were 21 member churches, that most of which had a national presence. Churches like the Methodist, the Anglican, the Reformed churches, and so on, and the Baptists. So they came together to form the Zimbabwe Council of Churches. But with that, we also worked at an organizational level. We collaborated with the Catholics, and we also collaborated with the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe, and we also collaborated with the indigenous churches. So at times when maybe some issues were of national importance, we could come together and speak from the same point, and maybe share, because we have a common belief in as Christians, even though maybe we have different ways in terms of delivering the message, but it was the same. So we could come together, maybe when we'd meet the president of the country, when we'd have some serious advocacy issues, we would come together and speak as one. But generally in the day-to-day operations, each one of us would operate separately, and that's where I was heading the programs department. But at some point I was appointed the acting general secretary for 2 years, which was 2015 and 2016. And in 2016, that's when I left the Zimbabwe Council of Churches and engaged in consultancy. And now I was specifically focusing on the environment for about 3 years before I joined the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, SAFCEI, which I am working for now as the Food and Climate Justice Manager.
It's really a very huge and rich experience that you have. And can you tell us, just out of curiosity, how much some of the advocacy issues that you were tackling while you were in the Zimbabwe Council of Churches? Because most of the churches that I know, that this kind of organizations, they focus more on development issues, community development activities. The Catholics have that kind of, structure and organization. But it's really very rare to hear this kind of coalitions actively doing advocacy work, not to mention the human rights advocacy work. Those are a very revered and feared areas to most of the organizations in Africa. Thank you.
The first point of advocacy that I was involved in involved advocacy for the child rights, which I'm also very passionate about. We part of it regarded the treatment of children in boarding school in terms of how they were supposed to be treated and how their rights were supposed to be safeguarded. To which, other than advocating for a child-friendly environment in schools where they are protected from abuse by members of staff and so on, we also trained the members of staff of most of our member churches' mission schools, so that we were regarding the mission schools as a safe space for children, regardless of who would be looking after them. Because the boarding masters, the teachers, we trained them on how they were supposed to treat children, and also on the children's rights, as well as the duties and obligations that the teachers and parents and the boarding masters have when they are entrusted with children from different backgrounds. So this was one of the most important things, and we worked in conjunction with the Zimbabwe Republic Police, who would furnish us with the details of the statistics of what was happening. And what actually happened is we had a decline in the rate or the issues of abuse. There were some abuses in some schools, but they were getting lower and lower. And the other work that we were also advocating for was we're advocating for peace in Zimbabwe, because during the period 2001 to 2009, Zimbabwe was there was a lot of political intolerance to the level that people were beaten up, people were maimed, people were killed, people disappeared, and so on. And this was one of the things that we advocated for, and to a point that jointly we had the audience of the president of Zimbabwe, where we went and presented a request that we should have peaceful elections and election processes, so that people would be free to choose, and also should not be afraid each time we are having an election. And to a certain extent, the level of violence that was there also declined, because the president openly pronounced that he was not in support of and in this case I'm talking about the then president, Gabriel Manyangaze. Yes. That's the one we had audience with. We had sought to we go and present our declaration for peace and our call for peace, which was a letter that we had written jointly for 30 minutes or 15 minutes just to hand over. But we had a long discussion that lasted almost for 3.5 hours, which was quite fruitful in terms of the discussion. Yes, so that was also one of, I would say that was the highlight of my advocacy work. Over and above that, in Zimbabwe, we also had Operation Muramba China, where houses that were purportedly built on land which the government had not sanctioned, even some that were built on the land that the local government ministry had actually said it was okay, he had issues. So we also engaged with the different authorities in terms of ensuring that the people that had been moved away from the places where they were settled illegally were treated with dignity, and also they were given alternative accommodation or places where they were supposed to go and live. And we even accommodated some into our church halls and so on until they got back to their normal places, and some were even allocated land elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
So those are some of the key things.
It's very fascinating to hear this kind of advocacy journey to the top of, government, like the president himself. So it must be a huge success. I also have a similar interest with children's rights. I used to work for SOS Children's Village in Ethiopia, to one of the oldest and biggest villages, and one of the issues that I personally dealt with was, the child abuses and some of the declarations, child right declarations that we used to advocate for. So I'm really happy to hear that. So when do you think that you have that interest on environmental or ecological justice activism work on climate change, food sovereignty, agroecology work? When do you think was the start?
This started in 2006 when we had a program where we were responding to the needs of people who lived in a very dry place in Zimbabwe, which is called Mberengwa.
Mm-hmm.
So we submitted a proposal to one of the organizations that we used to work with. Maybe can I mention their names?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, this is Christian Aid. Yeah, Christian Aid. And the proposal was to support the farmers in ensuring that even if they didn't have drought animals, they could still be able to grow crops successfully. So we engaged one of the organizations in Zimbabwe which was doing the farming God's way training. And we had our officers trained. Then in our proposal we had said we would support with the correct seeds, and would also in those days we had not moved to be purely organic, so we were using methods that were conserving water and that were also like not disturbing the earth when growing crops, which in a way was trying to look after the land. But at that moment in time, we were not well versed with the proper agroecological principles. So we still made use of fertilizer. But later on, maybe in the later stages, we then realized that the use of fertilizer itself was not supportive of the environment and biodiversity, to which we then moved back into the use of animal manure, and there was a huge difference in terms of our production and also in terms of the response that came from the land. And that is when I became acutely interested in the issues of food security at a household level, because some of the people that we're supporting were orphans, and we also had widows. So the changes that happened because of the growing of food organically encouraged me to say that there are people who can live better even when they have less resources as far as money to buy all these expensive fertilizers is concerned. And the fact that also their land looked much better, and the environment around where they were growing their crops was much looked after than compared to other places or the neighbors who were not part of the program. So that was the starting point. And in 2017, I was part of a group that was trained by SAFCEI in what we call the Faith Leaders Environment Advocacy training, which up to now I'm actually leading in that
It's
part.
still going.
So it's still ongoing, and it is a regional program, and now we've moved from the regional program and also now going to national training of faith leaders in environmental advocacy. This is when I actually learnt more on the issues of food security, but beyond that also looking at food sovereignty and what it means for a people to be reliant on themselves and the systems around them to feed their families as well as to take care of the land. And the fact that we're also looking at it from the perspective of faith, looking deeper into the aspect of that food is not only maybe the physical intake of food when we're looking at it from the faith perspective, but it has that spiritual aspect. And I did not only learn of it in terms of the Christian principles and values, but extended it to other faith like the Islamic faith, and also looking at Hindus and the Buddhists, and the traditional method which I had actually grown up to but had not really focused on it because of my Christian upbringing and background. So all this put together, and actually the agreement that goes across all the different faiths, convinced me that this is the way to grow crops in an organic manner, where we are not only taking care of ourselves and our interests, but we are also taking care of all creation. And later on, I read a book by Miles Monroe on living with purpose. And one of the things that he says is that everything that was created for a purpose. God had a purpose for it. And then when it was created, it was to fulfill a purpose. And that also drove me further to say, whatever is there has a purpose, and therefore we should let all creation have a chance to life, and to actually have that interaction where we, whatever food we want, we take only that which is necessary, and not to have things that go beyond what we need to have. And that actually set me going. That joined up with when it started, when we're looking at farming God's way, looking at trying to learn from nature what it is that which we can do and do it right. And so now I'm so passionate about it. I've also had different trainings in terms of farming, and I've done some small courses, short courses on that, and it is something that I am quite proud of. And even in my life at home, I have a backyard garden that I look after, and my entire family understands the principles of organic farming and agroecology from that little piece of land that I'm farming in Harare. So most of our vegetables, we don't buy vegetables from the supermarket. We take our vegetables fresh from our backyard, using the principles that I've learned and that I work with on a day-to-day basis. So it's not only something that I teach or I encourage others to do, but it's something that I am living. And as you can see, I look very healthy. And
the most fascinating thing about your experience is you started with actual groundwork, and you have got a sense of what works best and what's not really working for the land, for the communities, and you have that template, and you added this religion point of view, faith point of views. It's not only from the major phases or religions, but from indigenous cosmologies, world views and paradigms. So it's very fascinating. Even when we work with elders, while we were I was in Ethiopia, I used to work for Melka, and one of the programs that we led was intergenerational learning between the elder generation to the younger generations. And every time we have that deeper conversation with any elders of any religions, the kind of attachment, relationship, connection they have with nature, and the way they understand farming in sync with nature is completely different from what we have been taught in classes and educations. And to reconcile this conflicts of paradigms on when it comes to farming or food security is one of the challenges that remain. So can you now, if we move to SAFCEI, I have seen a number of phase institutions, from biggest to indigenous phase institutions on the website. I encourage everyone to go to your organization and study it more. But can you tell us what SAFCEI is, what they are doing, some of the activities, the major programs that you are involved in leading right now?
Thank you very much. With SAFCEI, I think I would say I arrived home when I started working for SAFCEI, because the programs that are there, we focus mainly on food and climate justice, energy and climate justice, and animal welfare, and as well as climate justice. So all our work is linked to climate justice, because this has become the greatest crisis that we are facing at the moment, world over, and we would want to also make our contribution as far as that is concerned.
Yeah.
But we would want to do it from a grounded perspective, where we have that, as I said, one of the key things is that respect for other creation, where we are saying SAFCEI's principle is that we are not at the top of the settings in terms of like being the most important species on earth, but we are part of a system. We don't take it as the pyramid where the people are at the pinnacle and then everything else is below them. We are saying we are in a circle where animals, plants, all the other reptiles are part and parcel of creation. So our motto is that we are the earth keepers, and even the people that we train are the earth keepers. Yeah. We are stewards of the earth. And you would find that if you read across the different faiths, that aspect comes through across most of the faith, that we are the stewards of the earth. And from a Christian perspective, even when you read about creation, man was put on earth when everything else was there, and each to serve a purpose, and his purpose was also to look after creation. So this is the principle, the founding principle on which SAFCEI's work is based, that we are part of creation, and therefore we are supposed to look after creation. And in all that we do, we believe that we are supposed not only to do things ourselves, but to encourage others through the way we live and through the training, and also making reference to the sacred texts that each and every one of our members reads. So if you are Muslim, we would make reference to the Muslim text. If you are a Buddhist, we will make reference to the sacred text from the Buddhist. And at times we then have a multi-faith approach to say what we are doing does not only need one faith to lead and others to join in, but to have a multi-faith approach where together we are doing it, because communities are not divided like you have a Muslim community separate in terms of the physical, but you would have people living in a community as Muslims, as Christians, Buddhists, traditional religion. So collectively, we want to have that approach, and where we are now saying everything that we do, we would want it to be ecologically right. So we speak about eco-justice. The justice for biodiversity is one that we are looking at, irrespective of where one lives. You may be living in a city or in a village or in a farming area. Everyone has to have that consciousness that whatever you do on a daily basis, because the first point is to look at the individual and say, what is it that which you can do to make a difference to creation, to ensure that biodiversity is preserved? And that is our point of departure. Each one of us to play a part. And because of that, you find that even when we are meeting somewhere, we are so conscious about where we are. We are so conscious about what we eat. We are also conscious about the manner in which our food is prepared, to such an extent that in some instances, when we are doing the Faith Leaders Environment Advocacy Training, which we call FLEET in short. Yes. We will also do what we call an energy audit, to have a look at and to audit the venue where we are in terms of the use of electricity, the use of water, how waste is managed, and we'll then give recommendations to our hosts in terms of what they can do differently, so that they are also living green, not in a way of just greenwashing, but maybe we would ensure that when you are moving away from your room, maybe going for an activity during the workshop, make sure that your room, the lights are switched on, the taps are closed, and also the waste is already segregated, which is what we would want to look at, so that we avoid making a huge footprint. So even during the workshop itself, we have what we would call the eco-footprinting exercise, where each one of us is supposed to look back and say, having attended this workshop, what was my contribution to the carbon emissions, to maybe the footprint on Earth? What was my footprint? So we encourage a light footprint on Earth for everyone, because everything that we do is supposed to ensure that all creation is given a chance in terms of where we are going.
Yeah.
But one of the programs in SAFCEI also relates to advocacy, or advocacy is part of our approach to work, where we would say, where science is speaking of things that are helpful even to the environment, we would also want science to lead in what we do. Then we would apply the moral and spiritual voice to the science. This is how we do our advocacy. So, for instance, when we are looking at our advocacy on food, we followed what had been scientifically proven, maybe in terms of what AGRA was actually doing. Like then, as the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, what they were doing, what had been proven by different organizations as far as evaluation was concerned. And we then say, is it morally right? Does it give us the spiritual peace to have a system like this continuing when we know that it is not good for the people, it is not good for the environment, and it is affecting biodiversity in a negative way? That's how we then do our advocacy. And in terms of food, we have pushed to have as many people being aware of this situation. And not only that, I think now you would understand that we then teamed up with other agencies to also speak out against the continued manner of monoculture that AGRA advocates for, to a point that we even had a meeting with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to try and convince them that whilst maybe they were thinking they were assisting in terms of funding this mode of farming, there were alternatives that they could pursue, and also fund the smallholder farmer to practice agroecology, of which I'm also very happy that being part of AFSA, I feel we are actually at home, because all the principles that AFSA put forward in sync with what we are already doing, and it is also in sync with our faith convictions, as well as when we look at the moral and the spiritual dimension to it, we feel we are in the right direction. And this is where we then want to associate with organizations that are sensitive to the needs of other members of creation, be they plant-based, animal, reptile, aquatic, wherever they are found, wherever life is found. Even non-life things around us should also be treated with respect, because, as I said earlier on, everything was created for a purpose, and let us give each and every aspect of life an opportunity to perform its purpose to the fullest.
This must be the core message. Nothing that's created is without a purpose. Every one of us, every creation has its own purpose to serve, which is really to have a living earth, a healthy ecosystem, healthy life for all of us. So I'm really happy that SAFCEI is really pushing this paradigm shift. The fight is not only on policy issues these days. It's just really changing the perception of wider public. It's not only decision makers, but everyone has to come to these realizations that we're not gonna be sustainable or ensure climate justice unless we start changing our worldviews, our understanding of issues that are deeper than us. So the perspective from faith leaders and faith institutions is very, very crucial on this regard. But I would like to touch upon, maybe would come at it more in detail when we speak about AFSA, about AGRA. But can you tell us? Can you recall how the connection between AFSA and SAFCEI started? Just to say how it came through, because AFSA is a champion of wants to champion smallholder farmers in Africa, is a voice of food sovereignty and agroecology social movements in Africa, and SAFCEI is one of the first faith-based institutions that are part of this huge continental struggle. And let me give you a space to say a little bit about that, and we pass on some of the activities that we do together as AFSA.
Thank you very much for that dimension to the linkages. The linkage between AFSA and SAFCEI also is the linkage of the people who lead the processes in the two organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Our executive director, Francesca De Gasparis, had a meeting that working relationship with the general coordinator for AFSA, that is Dr. Million Ali Bile, and when she was still working in another organization with
Gaia Foundation,
Wangari Mutai. So that's when they met, and so Francesca was aware of AFSA. So when she left that organization and joined SAFCEI, she knew the work of AFSA already, and she also knew what Million was into. So, and also the work that they were already doing then.
Yeah.
And because SAFCEI had also started the program on food and climate justice, she then felt that was a very good linkage, because the principles on which AFSA was operating actually were in sync with the principles that SAFCEI were also operating on, particularly looking at the issue of food sovereignty. I think that was a key issue that was common to both organizations, and she felt that since we are also a regional organization, it would be very good to join hands with those that specifically looked at the issue of food, and were also convinced that the only way to go was for us to be focusing on the issues of sovereignty, of food, and also working with those that are normally not given the space and platform to speak out. The fisher folk, the smallholder farmer, and the fact that in their different settings at times they are ignored by the policymakers, whereas on a day-to-day basis they are the people who are holding fort as far as the issue of biodiversity is concerned. So this is how it started, and therefore SAFCEI applied to be a member of SAFCEI as a faith-based organization, and it qualified in terms of all the requirements that are needed for one to be a member of AFSA, in terms of the work that SAFCEI was doing, as well as that it was member. It is also its own members who are right across the whole region that part of our SAFCEI. So that common point is what also drove us into becoming part of AFSA. But one of the other things that also set AFSA as one of the beacons which we felt we're supposed to work with is the inclusiveness of AFSA. It included everybody into the same level and also with the same respect for the work that they are doing. Ordinarily, people, the fisher folks and the gatherers, as well as people who look after livestock, are not the people that people would want to associate with because they were like not part of the mainstream economy, even in the African setup. But these are the people that have looked after the environment for all these years, and they've done so in a way that is unmatched, even without resources. So looking at those that are normally not regarded, or those that are not given a seat at the table, was also a point that SAFCEI regarded as a most important thing, because as we said, everybody created has a role to play, and that role and that purpose has been served consistently over the years, and that is why we felt maybe it is good for us to join, not only to give our perspective, but also to learn and also to have a bigger platform and to be joined for a good cause.
Thank you. You really talked about it. AFSA is the largest civil society network in Africa, and what makes it really very impactful and probably most peculiar is the inclusiveness. Like you said, we are network of networkers involving farmers organizations, fisher folks, indigenous peoples communities, youth networkers, women associations, faith leaders, faith institutions. So the driving philosophy behind it was really, we are faced with a systemic problem and we cannot address with a reductionist point of view. No single institution or organization or network has a solution for everything. But when we come together as a unified voice, then we can be able to speak on behalf of smallholder farmers in Africa and the entire food systems, food producers that we call them. So that was the thinking behind it, and one of the most profound work that we have been part of doing with SAFCEI was advocacy on agra. I know personally how much you invested on that work, and you were the driving force behind really making a voice for smallholder farmers in terms of really promoting the food sovereignty and agroecology aspect into that discussion. Now they have changed their name. It used to be the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. They suddenly dropped the Green Revolution term and they just said, call us just simply Agra. And they also changed the African Green Revolution Forum. So they are now called the African Food Systems Forum. So they are simply, detaching themselves away from the Green Revolution term as a term. But most of our challenges was not really about the naming, but it was about the practice. You just cannot change a name and continue doing the same thing and think that people's perceptions or advocacy would change. So can you just summarize for us how the work with Agra is progressing and what are our core issues and our advocacy messages?
Our key advocacy message is summarized by the running theme that our food is African. That summarizes it, and the fact that we should not be waiting for seeds when the rain season comes to come from overseas. The seed that we do not understand, the seed that does not support the biodiversity where it is being grown, the seed that will not only come on its own, but would require chemicals, like chemical fertilizers, would want weed killers in terms of the various chemicals that are used to remove weeds from the land, which will end up most of it in our water sources, which will kill our soil, because wherever all these chemicals are applied, we feel they are other members of creation who are resident in the soil, who are being destroyed and killed. As I said earlier on, every life that was created should be given a chance to life. And when you have chemicals being applied in the form of fertilizers, in the form of pesticides and so on, some of which are already banned in the United States and Europe, it is a huge concern for us, and it is something that we are saying is not good for people, it's not good for the biodiversity, it's not good for the soil. And therefore this is what we feel that we should be able to put through and say that let us have agroecology as the principle that we work with, one that supports life, one that supports healthy food, one that supports the biodiversity because of the variety that we have, because of the originality that we have. My executive director, Francesca De Gasperis, always says what we see in the indigenous seed that we grow is something that has gone through the system for over 1 million years and has survived the conditions of Africa. So this is best suited to the conditions. And not only that, it has the science to know what to take from the soil and what not to take from the soil. So it is a greater intelligence, but what all the laboratories in the world can put together. So this is why we should be able to follow what has been there and what is organic and what is natural and farmed in a way that would give life to the people, life to the soil, and life to biodiversity. And also our issue with the industrial agriculture that is happening in Africa is we need to destroy forests for us to have the monoculture to thrive. And that in itself does not also support other things that we are looking at. When we are looking at climate change, one of the things that is central is carbon sinking, which is naturally done by the forest. And when we look at agroecology, that is a process that would happen as we get our food, we are supporting what is around us. So it is also important to have a look at that mutual benefit of having food grown in a way that is supportive of other forms of life. Then we also have a look at the issue of the sovereignty. Is the food that is being forced on Africa culturally relevant to us? Remember, I also mentioned earlier on that we look at food not just as a physical intake, but food in Africa is used for specific ceremonies. It is used for cultural activities. So, and even before we grow the food, there are some rituals that have to be done in honor of the deity or the divine. We honor the one who provides food to us or who enables food to grow. And when we have all this chemical production, industrial level of agriculture, which does not have any way to support all this, it is not the right thing. And when we have one of the biggest crises that humanity has ever faced, which is the climate crisis, we need to take steps. And one of the ways and methods of taking steps is the adoption of agroecology. We need to ensure that we adopt agroecology as one of the means to mitigate against climate change, and also to enable the smallholder farmer, the fisher folk, to enable the indigenous people to survive this greatest disaster that is coming that is with us already. And this is the only way that we can do it, and this is through the respect for the methods that have been tested over the years, and also taking that which is beneficial from science. As remember, I also mentioned that while we understand that science brings some change, there are some researches that can be done within the agroecological principles that would help to have a system that is robust, but a system that is supportive of other life and creation.
One of the things that we were doing as AFSA was collecting these case studies. Yes. And documenting farmer-based activities, farming practices actually done using the agroecological principles and that are working. And most of the case studies have shown us that it can make us food secure, it can tackle the climate crisis like you said, it can address it will make sure that the communities have the food that they want to eat and is controlled by them. It will not make them dependent on industrial agriculture inputs like seeds from foreign seeds or chemicals or agrochemicals. So those examples, those case studies are there, but cannot convince the green revolution people. So how is the message getting across to them? We are calling agra funders, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Rockefeller Foundations to stop funding the green revolution in Africa or industrial agriculture in Africa, and to start instead investing on agroecological or ecologically sound way of farming systems in Africa. But they have continued doing the same thing. There is no much change coming. We don't see a lot of change from that front. We're not expecting that to come all of a sudden. But the challenge is even the evaluation that was done, several evaluations that was done on Agra, it shows that it's not working. They even failed to meet their own targets. So can you say something to summarize the whole thing and move on maybe to another question?
Yes. I think, like we said, we also believe on the scientific processes, and the scientific processes in terms of the evaluations that were done have proved beyond reasonable doubt. All three of them are in agreement that what is being done is an injustice to the African society and environment when we continue to impose industrial agriculture, which is degrading the land, which is destroying biodiversity, and which is also destroying people's livelihoods, which is a concern that when people's livelihoods are being destroyed and organizations continue to fund that model of farming, this is where now SAFCEI would say it is not morally right. And it is a spiritual injustice when you have people who are well aware of the impact of what they are funding, but would continue to do this. So we now are appealing to the powers that be, to those that are funding, that it is morally not right. It is morally unjust for them to stand and continue to fund a system that denies a livelihood for people and that denies life for other creation. Secondly, we are also looking at the spirituality of it. One of the fundamental rights that everybody should enjoy is the freedom of conscience. And as I said, food is part of the spirituality. And when we have food that is original being destroyed, we feel this is also, maybe coming from a rights perspective, this is also the negation of the right of the people of Africa, those that believe that our food and our spirituality go together. So it is also an appeal that as much as we have all the other rights that are being upheld all over the world, the rights of the African people are not being protected, because that which they hold to be very, very valuable in their life, their spirituality, is being destroyed when the food and the manner in which they grow food and the seeds that they have are also being taken away. And also looking at it from an economic perspective, Africa and the people that are now being made to be dependent on the genetically modified seeds are being asked to carry a burden that is far beyond their ability and capacity, because they have a way of living that they have lived and that which has helped them. And now when you see the funders supporting policies that deny people a right to have their own seeds, that also is an injustice that we should have to, and this is why we are calling on all the funders to say, please stop funding a process that denies other people their right. Allow the African people a choice to use the seed that they want, to choose the seed that they can keep and the seed that they can share, and not to fund policies that deny people a right. That is not development. When you stop other people from developing in alternative ways to the one that you believe in, that ceases to be development to me. Positive. There are ways and means of learning that has been going on, which we should also have respect for. And this is why we stand as AFSA and say these are fundamentals that have to be respected by those that purport to want to help Africa. Fund the smallholder farmer in agroecology, and we will see the improvement in the land. We would see the improvement in the biodiversity. We would see maybe the improvement in terms of the health of the local people, those that have no access to kind of resources that the industrial agriculture gives to the big companies. Let them thrive in a way that brings joy and happiness to them. Give them their right to choose, and give them their right to live according to the principles that have kept them so far and that have actually given them nutrition that they so require. I think most of the scientific experiments that have been done and they've been put across, I think Mexico is one of the very good examples that I've been following closely, where they have proven what GMOs can do, where they have proven what chemicals like glyphosate would do. Those are the things that we should also take cognizance of. The margin that is there, which is actually bringing people ill health, that is bringing people some of the diseases, that should be recognized and that should be appreciated, that this is something that should not be done to a people. And that Africa is being targeted is not right, because we are being denied our rights.
Thank you, Gabriel. You have explained it perfectly. And for people who are really interested to know more, they can always go to AFSA's website or SAFCEI's website and learn the different activities, advocacy activities that we are doing to promote the voice of smallholder farmers in Africa, and speak for agroecology and food sovereignty in Africa instead of the green revolution or industrial agriculture paradigms that has been really one of the dominant policy options taken by governments these days. So maybe as a good transition, can you tell us, for people who are interested to know, why do you think Africa should move toward this agroecology or move away from industrial agriculture and transition to agroecology or food sovereignty principles? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yes. Thank you very much for that dimension of our discussion, because when we look at the issue of food sovereignty, and when we look at our call for agroecology, I think, as you have said, there are examples that have been given, and there are case studies that have been supplied. And I have also seen proper case studies also in Zambia as well as in Zimbabwe of people who are making a livelihood out of agroecology. And further than that, there is a greater touch and impact of agroecological products in the communities where they live. For instance, in Zambia, one of the farmers there is actually supplying a hospital that deals with cancer issues, and the food that they are supplying is helping the cancer patients as they battle with cancer and recovery. For those that are under treatment, when they partake of the food that is grown from an agroecological farm, their recovery is much better than when they are consuming the other. So this should be a telling point, which we should also be having a look at. And when we are looking at the issues of climate change, I think that is one of the other biggest calls that make us feel that agroecology should be the way to go, because it supports the biodiversity. It takes away the system or the food system that has a greater impact on the environment. Remember, the industrial agriculture is pushing around between 35 to 37% of carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. That is when we start from the production of fertilizers to the farming processes to all the storage and right up to consumption and even the waste management. All these systems, when if they are localized, we will cut out a greater chunk of the greenhouse gas emissions. And this has also been scientifically proven that there would be a much lesser footprint when we adopt the agroecological principles of food production for Africa. And therefore, even as we are looking at mitigation, Africa's contribution would be much less as far as we are concerned at the moment. We are the least emitters of greenhouse gas as Africa. So with these principles put in place, it means even the future is safeguarded. Even the next generations would be making a lighter footprint on Earth if we are to adopt the agroecological principles now, rather than trying to pick it when we have reached the point of no return, or the tipping point. So it is wise, it is the wisdom that our forefathers had, even as they worked in a manner that was supportive of the land where they were growing their own food and the type of food that they were also growing, which helped in terms of health of the people, in terms of health of the environment, and in terms of the supporting of the livelihood of other creation as well. So it is, I would say it is a holistic way, and the principles that govern agroecology are very sensitive to other life and also to the environment where we live. And therefore, when AFSA is calling for agroecology, it is not just for the sake of it, but it is the concern for the now and for the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Gabriel. It's, I was really happy to meet you in Dubai. One of the things as AFSA and as SAFCEI that we're doing in this kind of, international climate change related negotiations is really advocating agroecology as a solution for climate change adaptation and mitigation in Africa. AFSA led a big delegation in the last COP28 negotiations, and we're really, advocating, urging, African governments to start considering agroecology as a climate solution, both mostly for adaptation and mitigation issues. And it's not always bad. There are some hopes. For example, the Ugandan government has accepted agroecology as a climate solution, which we are so proud of. So we will continue. The struggle will continue to really push African governments to start listening their own people. Some of the local voices, regional voices from their own people, and start advocating the solutions that works instead of the solutions that makes people more dependent and destroys their environment and their capacity to build resilient food systems in Africa. And just like you said, we are even destroying their livelihood, let alone bring a solution to them. So while we are at it, maybe just to come back a little bit about you as a person, we wanted to know more about you. It's not only about the work. So we recently, in 2022, we launched My Food is African campaign. So as you know, one of the main idea was really to counter, advocate for our own culturally appropriate foods, for people to start appreciating our food, appreciating our indigenous way of making foods, how healthy it is, how nutritionally rich our seeds or our foods are, and to really connect people to their own roots. Some of these fast food cultures are fast encroaching African countries, mainly cities and urban dwellers. So there is a push to resist that kind of growth, and to start making people aware of what they have as a people and as a culture. So can I ask you what your favorite African food is, and tell us why these kind of campaigns are very critical and related to what you've been talking before, how spiritual food is, from the faith point of view.
Thank you very much. My favorite food is what we call sadza, which is the thick maize meal porridge. But for us in Zimbabwe, sadza is not only made from the maize meal, but it can also be made from sorghum as well as from millet. And when I eat millet sadza, it has that aroma that connects me back to the time that my grandmother would cook that, and she would prepare it with fish that she would have caught from the river, and she would always say we should just catch enough so that next year we are supposed to be able to have some fish as well. So she would then prepare it in a manner that I liked most, where she would boil it and also add some of the herbs from our environment and from our garden. And when I have sadza and millet sadza with fish, that would be the best. But I would enjoy it even more when I'm eating this with the traditional vegetables that grow in our village, which is called rude or ulude. That, even right now, my mouth is watering because it is, because my grandmother would say this vegetable would help your health, would help to your immune system. You will not fall ill easily because this vegetable enables you to be stronger. And as a young boy, I would eat that, and I would go out and I would tell my friends, today I ate millet salsa and ulude, so I'm stronger.
Yeah.
So up to now, even my wife knows that when she cooks ulude and the millet salsa, I'm happy and I do enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, that's part of. I really like to hear this kind of stories because it speaks for the whole Africa. We all have that deep rooted connection with our food and how it was made, and they bring us back to our home. Every time I think of food, is immediately I think of my mother, how she used to make it, and we have this kind of profound relationship with food and the entire process. So that's why every time this new paradigm, industrial paradigm, encroaching our food systems and eroding our cultural base, we are losing the sense of food as we know it. And particularly the young generation should really be the safeguards, the stewards of this richness. Like you said, this kind of food nourishes you. You can feel it while you are eating it. But the food that we buy from fast foods, and it while you are eating. I sometimes feel like it's just it doesn't feel like it's a food or
exactly
or something. So yeah. So one thing that I didn't ask you was, your organization says Southern African phase institutions for environment, but you are speaking on behalf of Africa, to be honest. Do you have any other networks that are part of your members who are from East Africa or West Africa? And along that line, can you tell us how many African countries you have been to, just to give our viewers that you're not speaking only from one experience or a single country experience, but you have this diverse understanding of how other communities in different African countries are also working or are also asking to amplify their voice on behalf of them.
Thank you very much. SAFCEI is in Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, but the work that we do has gone beyond just Southern Africa, and we actually also work in places like Uganda, and we also work in Kenya, and during COVID, our reach went even beyond that, to an extent that now we have people who are members who come as far as Nigeria, and also we have people from Cameroon who have attended some of our sessions and have become members of SAFCEI. And because of our linkages also with AFSA, I've traveled to countries as far as Senegal, and have worked with the people from Senegal on issues of our food. So we have connections with people in Senegal and also in Ethiopia, of which I've also enjoyed the traditional food in Ethiopia a lot. Each time I visit Ethiopia, I feel this is real food because of the way and manner in which it is prepared, which I enjoy a lot. So I have seen, and each time I've traveled, I've also insisted on not only eating from the hotels where I'll be staying, but also to go into the communities and sample the food that they prepare. And I found that the richness of the indigenous African food surpasses all other food that I've eaten.
Yeah.
Because it is original and it still has the taste. I always make a joke in when I'm in some workshops that when I grew up in the village, you would find that whoever would slaughter chicken for their relish and prepare it, when it was being prepared, neighbors would know that somebody is preparing chicken because it had the rich flavor that would the aroma would spread easily. But right now you can have somebody preparing the chicken next door and you wouldn't even know what type of food they are preparing. So that is the difference. It is so natural. So when you go into the communities in the countries that I have traveled to all Southern African countries, Zambia, Malawi, Mozambique, Eswatini, Botswana, Namibia. When you go into the community, the taste and the smell of that food is unique. You can feel it. You would want to be part of it. So that is, and because of that, when you get to meet people, they would always say, this food is disappearing. At the rate at which we are going, maybe in 20 years' time, we may not have it. But we will say, this is the food that we are supposed to preserve. And in Zimbabwe right now, as part of my Food is African, there are food festival where people are taught about the traditional types of food. And people who have attended the food festival, most of them have now begun to have the respect and also to desire and to look out for the ingredients to prepare food in the traditional way. This year, as a SAFCEI, would want to take this to Eastern Cape in South Africa, where we should be having a food festival to just bring that back, because in Eastern Cape is one of the places where a lot of the indigenous food is still being grown and also is still being served in its original state. So would want to actually showcase this, to say this is the way that food should be prepared and this is the way that people should enjoy it. So I speak not only from what I have read and seen, but what I have seen, what I have tasted. And you'd find when people partake of this food, I would remember President Robert Mugabe used to say, HIV positive people should be allowed to eat the traditional food. And you'd go to hospitals and they would recommend it. And from that point, I realized that there is something in our traditional food that would assist people when they are having ill health. And right now, we have started eating a lot of the indigenous food. As we do our workshops in SAFCEI, one of the topics that we look at is to have a session where people speak about at least one indigenous food from their region. And I have adopted as many of these traditional foods at home as possible. And it's nourishing. Thank you very much.
It's very true. You know, for AFSA, during COVID, we published a book entitled Surviving COVID under my Food is African campaign, and we kind of tried to explore through stories, the kind of foods, indigenous African foods that are really nutritious enough to build our immune system, As you know, the vaccines came very, very late for Africa. So how people survived COVID in Africa mostly is because of, our food system was not totally dependent on the industrial food system. We grow our own food and it's mostly healthy and it builds our immune system better than the civilized ones, So thank you for your word and wisdom. Maybe before we conclude, I would ask you if you have a message for, youth, young generations, in terms of, you have a vast experience, both from development issues, advocacy in different spectrum of issues, to be honest. So what would your message or advice would be for a youth who aspire to be a voice for climate justice, ecological justice, environmental justice, or food justice workers in Africa, nationally and internationally?
Thank you. To the youths that all over the world, and maybe specifically Africa, the food that's around you has everything that your body would need. It has been tested not only by the laboratories, but it has been tested over 1 million years, and it has survived in this environment because it is there for a purpose, and that purpose is for your good health and for your nutrition. And the wisdom that is contained in every plant that we eat is the wisdom that has been built over the years, because the plants would know what is good for the body and what is not good for the body. They would select the nutrients and the micronutrients that are necessary for your good health, that are necessary for your nutrition, and that are necessary for your growth and also for your life. Food is life, and for the African, we say your food should be your medicine. Every day, the type of food that you eat should help you to build your immunity, should help you to fend off certain diseases. As you have already mentioned, the issue of COVID, that was also the kind of food that people were exposed to as they were growing. It helped them to be able to be resilient to this type of disease. So to the youth, I'm saying, let's adopt the way that has life. The food that gives life, the food that gives health, the food that provides the necessary nutrition and balance. And just to say, the chemicals that make the chickens grow fast will still be in the chicken when you partake of it, and it will have an effect and impact on your life. Try and make use of organic food. It helps. You would find right now the people that are pushing for industrial and genetically modified food and themselves not partakers of the food that they advocate for. They would spend the huge profits that they make in buying organic and healthy food. And in one of the case studies in Zambia, the major consumers of the food that is coming from the agroecological farm is actually ordered by airlines, first class, business class. That is where it is sold, because they don't eat what they grow. They eat that which is healthy, which is good, and this is an organic food that is grown in agroecological farms. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe, one question would lead to another questions. Maybe what would your message be for people who are really, try to support Africa and maybe got it in a wrong way? We're not gonna judge everyone who's, supporting or donor organizations or governments are doing the things that they're doing intentionally to destroy Africa. I don't have that belief, but they somehow they get it wrong. And how can we correct that path? And what would your message be for donor organizations around the world to really start looking how to fund agroecological movements in Africa? And what would your message be also to African governments who has that power to make the policy shift toward this sustainable way of living in Africa?
Thank you very much for that, Kirubel. We know that the drive generally for most of the development organizations, governments world over, at times is that there should be food that is provided for everyone. That is maybe the desire that they have. But our call is to say, listen to other voices, listen to the voice from Africa, and try to support what they are called for the way in which food should be produced. Try to understand where Africa is coming from in terms of its food system, one that would be sustainable, and support their efforts to bring this type of production to a level where it has always been, where it has been feeding the villages, where it has been sending food to the city centers.
Yeah.
From time immemorial, even right up to now, the villages are still supporting a lot of the markets in the urban areas. This system would work, but we should also make sure that the agroecological principles are applied where we minimize or we shorten the distances to the market for the food.
Yeah.
They should support the initiatives that are already in place for agroecological principles. We have seen their efforts in the industrial agriculture, and the results are there for everyone to see. Let's support the smallholder farmer. Let's support the fisher folk. Let's support the indigenous people in their ways of life, and see where this would take us, and also see the kind of results that would come as far as the issue of adaptation and mitigation to climate change are concerned. There is hope in agroecology. There are case studies, as you have already mentioned, that AFSA have given and sharing out there. They should go through this and see the kind of changes that have happened. There is hope in agroecology, which, if followed, would be able to bring down the issues of the greenhouse gas emissions, and also to be part of the solutions that should be used as we tackle the climate crisis. It is important that this choice is given as one of the options to the African people so that they can make the difference. We understand that, like you correctly said, it's not everyone who is giving the support to industrial agriculture who is doing it out of malice. Some are hoping that what they are doing is actually bringing the kind of change that is very good. But let us use the methods that the African farmer has been using and is also calling for, so that the type of food that is culturally good for them, that is culturally relevant, should be produced enough for the communities where it is supposed to be consumed, so that the food sovereignty that AFSA, that SAFCEI is talking about would come to fruition. We are calling for that support. Please help through the redirecting of your funding for these projects to go on, for this way of life and the system of food to thrive, so that Africa would come back, would be back to the level of self-sufficiency that agroecology would bring. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. I mean, this is kind of penetrating words, messages, words of wisdom, and words of experience. So I highly appreciate everything that we have discussed, and most of all, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, to be honest, for making the time at this late hour in your country. I'm sure it's already 8 now.
It's getting to 8, but for Cape Town, the sun is just set now, so it's still fine.
I felt bad to catch you on this late evening time, but I am also very thankful and respectful for your time, for making the time to talk to us. I hope our readers and viewers have many things to learn from your experience and some of the messages that were communicated to them. So we end the conversation here, but don't go away. Let me close this one first.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.